I'm just going to talk a little bit more about plastics. I have a confession to make. I'm very much into sustainable fashion. I'm interested in plastics, but I'm not a specialist whatsoever on life cycle assessment, but I'm going to try to talk a little bit about different things why I feel it's quite important to actually look at these different aspects. So first of all, I think Katja already set it up quite nicely in terms of what the problem is. We are very much accustomed to having garments that are easy care. So whether or not this is something to do with we don't have to laundry, like we don't have to iron them anymore, they're super easy to wash, they're drying super quick, and most of the time the reason why this is the fact is because they're made from materials that we classify as plastics. Within the UK, we also do have a lot of throwaway fashion. I think Katja showed a couple of the examples that are all headquartered in the UK. But again, it is things that we are used to. Whose fault it is kind of like a chicken and egg question, I always feel, because on the one hand, we do have companies producing more and more. On the other hand, as consumers, and sometimes all of us might do this, we also feel, why is there nothing new in the shopping windows? Because we are so used that everything is turning around within a weekly basis. And this is also something that we are looking for. So fast fashion is definitely something that we are all kind of like part of. Whilst we are walking and talking, within the past 20 minutes, we probably all shed over 240,000 microfibers. As Kirsty highlighted, we don't actually see them. So they're just floating around, they're airborne. We might shed them more when we actually, for example, like wash them, if we don't wash them in ways that Kirsty outlined. And they're also, like, our garments shed normally more microfibers at the beginning, whilst over the lifetime, they're actually starting to slightly shed less. Now, one of the things that we've also observed is that a lot more people are actually environmentally conscious, especially since the elephant in the room, COVID. We have looked for different alternatives. Sometimes this might also mean that we are looking at garments that are made from more natural materials. But again, it doesn't mean just because it's natural materials that they don't shed any microfibers. They do. They're just not microplastics. But again, they also might have some issues. One of also like the biggest issues is the fact that we produce quite a lot of waste. I always find this graphic quite interesting because it sort of like visualizes what's actually happening. But to really reiterate this, we have over 350,000 tons of clothes. So it's 29,000 London double-decker buses that are actually going into landfill within the UK. So it's massive amounts. The majority of them are made from mixed fibers. So as Katja already highlighted, there's also an issue because we can't really recycle them. So even though we might have the best of intentions, it doesn't always really work, which again has implications for life cycle assessment, but also the impact that we can measure and that our garments have, not only from an environmental perspective, but also from a social perspective. Katja already highlighted this, and Kirsty also alluded to this, is that we're actually consuming more and more. Everything has gone up. We are continuously consuming more. We have more and more garments. I know some people in the audience already have done research about it, how sufficient, like how many garments do you actually need to have? That's a good question as well. And what materials do they need to be out of? So Katja alluded to that sometimes when you're actually going into sports, or there might be certain professions where plastics are actually vital because they can protect you from, for example, like heat or anything else, or from just being injured, whilst in other senses we might not actually necessarily need to have garments made out of plastic, but just because it's convenient, that's something that we've been accustomed to. Now, if you look at where microplastics actually come from, so Fashion Revolution has done an amazing job in kind of like really visualizing this, which I thought was really brilliant. And one of the things that actually highlights is that 35% of microplastics do come from our garments. Even though we might think there's like other areas that must be a lot bigger, it actually isn't the case. The second largest producer are tires. So whenever we are driving or use public transport, there's also microplastics that are being released. Now, Kirsty already highlighted where things actually, like, where do we find them? We find them in fish, in the most remote locations that we can actually see. So in the Arctic oceans, we might have found them in seals. We might have seen them in Australia in seafood. There's on the peaks that Kirsty already mentioned in Mount Everest. There's also a lot of crustaceans where we find them in. So one of the things that we are probably aware of now is that we might be eating microfibers. We don't know what the implications of this actually, like what the implications are, and whether or not this is particularly dangerous or not. We simply don't know, because fast fashion, even though people say slow fashion is a movement, I would argue the opposite, that it is actually fast fashion that is a movement, because it hasn't been around for that much amount of time. So all of the microfibers, all of the microplastics that are being released, we simply do not know what's going to happen in the future. So this is also why the circular economy is quite interesting, because we're trying to reuse, and the more we use our garments, the better it is, not only for CO2 emissions and from a life cycle perspective, but also in terms of releasing microfibers, because at a certain moment in time it sort of like stabilizes and there's not that many microfibers that are being released. Having said that, as Kirsty already outlined, there's also quite a lot of different things that we can do in order to reduce the impacts microfiber have. One of them is, for example, using filtration system, using different items in our laundering machine that actually capture those microfibers as well. But it's all about, and one thing that I'm very fascinated about is how we can actually make reuse out of it. I saw that somebody in the chat, I'm hoping I'm not mispronouncing the name, I'm really sorry if I do, but Iwube already highlighted that she's doing accessories and also shopping bags made from plastics, and collecting loads of different things, and an upcycling technique, which I think is super fascinating. And absolutely incredible, because again, it also shows there's a lot of things that we can actually do in order to reuse plastics that are already in our environment, and what we can actually really make use of. So it's absolutely fascinating. Katja is the founder of the Sustainable Fashion Consumption Network as well, and she was also leading quite a lot of different projects, and one of them that I thought is really nice to actually highlight is this specific graphic, where a lot of people from the network have worked together on, but really outlined that there's different options in terms of reuse, and also the little use phase where Kirsty's work falls into as well in terms of care, what we can actually do in order also to reduce microplastics. Again, one of the things that I also wanted to say, there is loads of examples of where plastics might actually be useful and or might also have interesting purposes. So, for example, when we think about recycling, we might see cross-industry collaborations. So if you, for example, think about water bottles that are then transferred into T-shirts, whether or not this is always the best option is a different question. But again, we are reusing quite a lot of different things in different industries, and we're actually making use of things that are already out there. And it's the same thing. Freitag is one of the companies that also reuses plastics from the transportation industry and makes them into bags. Those bags are almost indestructible. Having had one since I was 16, I still have it. It still looks good. I still haven't managed to break it. So again, sometimes plastics can also be quite fantastic, because these ones are designed for example, like cyclists and as messenger bags. So when it's raining, obviously it protects it from whatever those messengers have to carry along. But at the same time, they're so robust that nothing really happens to them. And it's also sometimes thinking about longevity and how long can we actually use these products. So it might be quite useful as well. Within the fashion industry, we see increasingly more action being taken in terms of recycled and recyclable materials that are being used. We talk a lot about extending the life of garments and accessories, and we're also talking a lot about longevity, which again is quite important. And then it can also reduce plastics as well. So I hope I gave you a very brief whistle stop and tried to add in a little bit more from Kirsty and also from Katja in terms of why sometimes plastics might actually be important to use, but on the other hand, there's always challenges with the materials that we have as well. But thank you very much.